Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Boss Battle. Now this is a card game from 1 to 4 players. The main idea of the game is that there are a number of heroes battling against, well, a powerful boss. In a 4-player game, one person takes on the role of the boss, while the other 3 players take on the 3 typical heroes. A mage, a warrior, and a priestess. And I'm not 100% sure if there are different versions of this game, as my rulebook says that there's a deluxe edition where there's also a thief hero and another boss to play, the necromancer. I have both of these, so I'm assuming this is the deluxe edition of the game, which I'll be showing. But back to the basics of the theme of the game. So far, it sounds pretty generic. Now the thing that should set this game apart is the round slot cooldown. Each card has a round slot that it has to be played in, but most cards will only activate in the 0 round slot. So the timing of when you play cards and in what order they trigger on both sides is going to be the most important part of the game. Now in the overview, I'll be showing you the 3 versus 1 play mode, but there are other game modes in the box. And honestly, that often worries me, as I want to play the game the way the designers intended, and giving me more options under the sun doesn't necessarily fill me with confidence. But there's only one way to find out, and that's get it to the table and get it played. So, will my fears be unfounded and this will be a game for all the ages, or should it just be chucked on the nearest bonfire? Let's get it to the table, see how it's played, and we'll come back to my final thoughts on Boss Battle. So here we have Boss Battle set up for 4 players. It is set up as a 3 versus 1 game. 1 player is the boss, and the other 3 players are the heroes. There are a bunch of different game modes, but I'll use this one to walk through the basics of the gameplay. I'll also not be going over all the rules, but enough to help you understand how the game works. Before we get into the gameplay, let's go over the board, as there are keywords used that refer to this placement board. The board is split into 2 halves, called queues. There's the hero queue and the boss queue. Each side can only play in their own queue. Within each queue, there are also 3 lanes on the board. Each lane represents a hero, and each lane also has round slots 0, 1, and 2 on both sides of the board. I'll get into more details on these round slots, but basically any boss cards in this lane will attack the hero that is assigned to this lane. There are 2 other sideboards, one to track turns and rounds, and the other sideboard to track health of all the players. Now that we've seen the boards, let's have a look at the cards, which are really the heart of the game. Each card will have a round slot number. These tie into the round numbers in the lanes on the placement board. If a card has a round number 1, it must be placed in that round slot in your queue. The cost of the card is in this box, and there are basically 3 options. No cost, which means you can play the card for free. A bump back cost, that is, you must move 1 card back 1 round slot in your queue, or a discard cost. You must discard a card from your hand to play this one. Now some costs are split, where you have to do one or the other. At the bottom of each card, it will give you a description. It will list when the action takes place, who or where it happens, and finally, what it actually does. The top left will also be the primary action of the card. That is, what does it do when it's activated? For this card, when it's activated, it's going to deal damage to the boss. The secondary effects are usually outlined in the description of the card. All abilities are also outlined in the rulebook and are pretty straightforward. They're going to be things like dealing damage, healing, putting up a shield, drawing cards, discarding cards, and the like. Each card also has a type on them. There are resolution cards, which will only trigger their primary effect when they're activated during the resolution phase, and I'll talk more about the phases in a bit. After they've been activated, they're going to be discarded. Active cards. Now these cards will continually provide a benefit while they're in your queue. Field cards. These activate just like resolution cards, that is, during the resolution phase, but they will not be discarded after they're activated. These are usually things like shield cards, which will only be discarded when the shield is broken or depleted. And finally, there are counter cards. Now these do not have a slot number, as they are only played in response to something else that has happened. They will tell you when they trigger and how they're played, all in description text. Cards will also have a speed, and this will matter during the resolution phase. Faster cards, of course, trigger first. And at the bottom of the card, there is also levels. Now that we have some of the basics and terminology explained, let's talk about the setup and gameplay. Place the round trackers besides the initial rounds. There are 2 of them because both sides can move through the rounds at different rates. Each player will pick either a hero or boss depending on what side they're taking, and take their set of cards. Find the character card that represents your character and set it aside. It will tell you your maximum health and where to put your marker on the matching space on the health bar. It will also tell you how much you heal when you level up, and finally it will show you your hand size. Now the boss's card is slightly different. It will show you a power level and you're going to be adding that much power to your power pool. This is how much you can spend on cards each round. At the start of the game, you can only draw from your level 1 cards, so your power is essentially your hand size limit. For the boss, they're going to separate their cards into 3 levels, shuffle each one and place them face down in front of them. For the heroes, they're going to separate them into the 4 levels. Shuffle the level 0 cards and set them aside, then shuffle the level 1 cards. Draw 3 of them, and out of those 3, you're going to pick 2 and add them to your level 0 cards and reshuffle. This is your opening deck. The unchosen level 1 cards and the rest of the level 1 cards go back into your box and will not be using them for the rest of the game. The level 2 and 3 cards are set aside until you level up. Each hero is assigned a lane, and that is their lane for the entire game. Any damage done by the boss in that lane will hit that hero. You're now ready to play the game. Now the game is played over a finite number of rounds. The heroes win if they are able to get the boss's health to 0 or below at the end of the countdown phase, and the boss wins if either the boss can weaken all heroes, that is, get their health below 0 at the end of the countdown phase, or if the boss's round counter reaches the game over on the round track. Now each round is split into 5 phases. First, the draw phase. Each player will draw up to their hand size. If you're already at or above your hand size, do not draw any more cards. Now for the boss, they can draw cards up to their power. So if they start with 5 power, you can have 5 level 1 cards in your hand. As the boss levels up, they get access to more expensive cards, and they're also going to be getting more power. The cost of these cards is equal to their level. So if a boss is at level 3 and has 10 power in their power pool, they could hold 10 level 1 cards, or 5 level 2 cards, or even 3 level 3 cards plus a level 1 card, or any combination of cards as long as they don't go over a total of 10. Once all players have drawn their cards, we move into the placement phase. The boss and heroes will take turns placing cards. Each hero will place 1 card, and the boss will be playing 3 cards in total. The heroes can decide who will place when, but each hero can only place once per round. Now a few things to remember when placing cards. You'll only ever be placing cards in your queue. You must make cards into the round slot that matches the round number of the card. Now heroes are working as a team and can show their cards and strategize amongst themselves. When a hero places a card, it can be into any hero lane. Again, the heroes are playing cooperatively. When a hero places a card, they'll place their turn marker on the board. When the boss places one of their cards, they're just going to be advancing their token. If either side plays a counter card, it does not count as their placement. Once both sides have finished placing the cards, they go to the special phase. Each player has a special ability outlined on their card, and this is the phase that those are triggered. Each special ability will have conditions and how they're triggered and what they do. Now, it's not mandatory to trigger them if you can, but it's the only time during the round that they can be triggered. We then move on to the resolution phase. All the cards that are in round 0 slots are now activated for their primary abilities. These cards will trigger based on their speed. The cards with the highest speed will go next. If the speeds are tied between the boss and the heroes, the boss's cards will trigger first. If they are triggered amongst one side, that is, let's say the boss has 3 cards all speed 5, then the boss will decide which order they trigger, and the same thing for the heroes. Once the cards have been activated and discarded, if required, we move to the countdown phase. During the countdown phase, each card moves up 1 round into an empty slot. If there's no empty slot for it to move into, it does not move. So slot 2 cards will move into slot 1, slot 1 cards go into slot 0. After moving all the cards, you move each round marker up 1 spot. Now, each round marker does move up 1 spot every round, but there are instances where the round markers can move up quicker. If the boss has weakened a player during the round, they can move up their marker 1 extra space, but only ever once per round. They also receive 1 extra power. Heroes can gain an extra round space if 2 or more of them were able to trigger their special abilities during the same round. Again, you can only do this once per round. When your side's round marker reaches round 4 and 7, your side will also level up. When the boss levels up, they'll receive more power, heal based on their pink hearts as shown on their character card, and get access to the next level cards. When heroes level up, their hand size will increase by 1. They will also heal, again based on their pink hearts on their character card, and gain access to the next level of cards. When the heroes get the next level of cards, they will randomly pick 3, choose 2 of those to add to their deck, and the rest of the level cards are placed back into the box. These rounds continue until either the heroes have reduced the boss's health to 0 or below at the end of the countdown phase, in which case they have won, and the boss will win if they get all the heroes to a weakened state by the end of the countdown phase, or the boss is able to get their round marker to the game over round. And this is the basics of the game. There are several more rules and components like the various tokens that come into play, but this should hopefully give you enough to understand the basics of the gameplay. Now, let's get back to see what I thought about Boss Battle. So, theme and components. Theme, well, it's generically generic theme if there ever was one. Here are 3 heroes, and go on, guess which classes you are. That's right, mage, priest, and warrior, and maybe a thief. And you're battling a dragon or a necromancer. Yes, you all have names, and maybe the genericness will help new players with what their characters will do. I mean, if you get a warrior, their cards are about hitting things. If you're a priest, well, your job is to heal. So although the whole game's theme is generically bland, they did keep the theme within the characters. What they do, both heroes and boss, kind of makes sense for what they are. I just wish it was set in a richer world and they expanded what it means to be these classes. For me, I dislike generic fantasy games, and this is kind of what this is. Now, for the components, they're okay for the most part. The boards look okay, but I am glad that there are boards, especially for the main board. There was never any question of which card was where or in what round it was in. So those boards are functional, if honestly a little on the bland side. No, bland's not the right word. I'm going to go back to generic. I don't want to keep on using that word, but this is what it looks like. Now, the cards are good quality, and I really do like the art on them, and there's a fair bit of art through the cards. Each card type has a different piece of artwork, and I think that works very well. There are tuck boxes for all the different sets of cards, and the tokens are decent as well. I'd have liked to have some more tokens, as I'm not a big fan of being double-sided. You know, one thing on one side and something else on the other, and we did run out of certain types while playing in a 4-player game. So all in all, the components are a mixed bag. Now, the one thing I do need to call out separately from the other components is this rulebook. I am not happy with this, and it feels like it's not finished. For example, on the very first page of the rulebook, it lists how many cards you get for each hero. It says 28, but the priestess deck actually has 32 cards, because one of her cards, and these need to be set aside, and the cards themselves do say, don't shuffle them into your deck. They're not listed here. The rules on placement are also a bit wonky when it comes to counter cards. In the card types section of the rulebook, it says play a counter card when the conditions are met and resolve it. Straight enough. Then during the placement phase in the rulebook, it mentions counter cards can be played when their conditions are met, don't count as turns, etc. Makes perfect sense. Then it goes into an entire section on bosses playing counter cards, and it just confuses the whole issue as how they work. I'm still not 100% sure if we played the boss's counter cards correctly, because from the rulebook, we were confused over what rules they follow. The game rules feels unfinished. They function well enough for the 3 versus 1 game, which is where the game feels like it was designed to be as. But even then, you're often left to interpret and deciding as a group what something means. When you go to the other modes, the rules are just not clear and almost frustrating. So I'm not a big fan of these rules. Anyway, let's get on to the gameplay. Start off with some of my favorite parts of the game, and that's the queue system. I really like the idea of this mechanism. Not so sure I actually like it in the actual gameplay. When you're playing cards in the early game, there's a lot of which cards you want to play where. Maybe using a bump back ability to free up a space. Or is there something that they have on their side that will mess up my plan? But after a few rounds, you're left with very few choices. Your slots are probably going to be reasonably full, and the cards in your hand need to go in the slots that are full. In all the game modes I tried, there were at least one round or two where there is no place for one of the sides to play. And in a game that's only 9 rounds long at max, losing out in a round really doesn't feel well when you're playing. So although I like the idea, I'm not sure I like the implementation of the game. I almost wish there was a method of flushing cards both from your hand and from the field. The bump back payment system can technically be used to make some space, but it quite often meant that people were going to be sacrificing a card because you had to bump them off the board if they were in round number 2. Now, I also really did like the cooperative nature of the heroes. When there were 3 heroes being played and being able to play in each other's lanes led to some real synergies between the cards and cooperation between the heroes. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough, as I wish there was more ways to cooperate, like maybe another player can play the discard cost for another player playing a card. And that really sums up my basic feelings about the entire game. I like the idea of the game much more than I actually enjoyed playing the game. I played it at the full 4 players, and if you're going to play the game, this is the way to do it. It's not great, but honestly, it's probably the best of all modes. You kind of need the 3 heroes to play off of each other as they all have different abilities. And if you lose one of those heroes, because let's say you're going to be playing 2 versus 1, the other heroes just are not able to pick up that slack, and you definitely feel a hole in your party. I also played the cooperative mode and also the solo mode against an AI boss. I found it very uninspiring. Not having an opponent playing the boss, I just didn't find it as fun as just an automatic. If it's this type of card, it goes here. At least with playing against a human, they can at least strategize with their cards. I also really dislike the 1v1 mode. I played the priestess against the dragon. The priestess heals and has very few attacks, and the game just went on way too long, and we just ended up quitting partway through the game because the game felt too drawn out for what we wanted to do. Now, there may be some other combinations of 1v1 that might work, but my experience, they just didn't. So though there are many ways to play the game, I think the game really only works at 3 versus 1. And even there, I can say I didn't love the game. So would I recommend this one? No, I don't think I would recommend this one. Although I enjoy the idea of the queue and the round mechanism, and I also really enjoyed the cooperative nature of the game. I liked the thematic tie-in between the heroes' classes and the cards that they played. I also liked that the heroes felt fairly different from each other. I thought the idea of having multiple ways to play was maybe a nice add to the basic gameplay. Unfortunately, it all comes down to an execution failure for me in this game. I ended up disliking the restrictive nature of the queue and round structure, as it caused some players not to be able to play any cards in their turn, and that's just not fun. I wanted more cooperation between players. There needs to be a way to do deck building if they're going to be playing less than 4 players. If you're not playing with their priestess, for example, then you're missing a way to heal. And heaven forbid, you don't play with the warrior, or else you're not going to be able to hit anything. The 4-player game worked, and I found all other player counts just didn't work well for me, as it seemed that they were playing with an obvious hole in your team. And I'll say it again, the rulebook felt it was like for an older version of the game and left too many unanswered questions or vagueness that I just don't want in my games. Overall though, I'm going to give this game a 5.5 out of 10. Now for 4 players, the 3 versus 1, I might bump that up to like a 6.5, maybe even a 7. No, keep it at 6.5. But overall, 5.5. This is a game with some good ideas, but I think it needed to be developed some more and needed some refinement to make sure that the interesting nugget of mechanisms that do exist don't get lost during the implementation of the gameplay. So this game is a pass for me, but I will be looking out for the next game as I like where they're coming from in this game. I just felt this time they stumbled before they got to the finish line. Oh well, that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.